Y'all doing okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. So we're here at Lee Hall. Lee Hall's really the only major surviving 19th century plantation home on Virginia's Lower Peninsula. And the small earthen area, the redoubt right behind me, is really the only remaining evidence of this area being occupied by General Magruder that we've been talking about during the Peninsula Campaign in 1862. So we're going to walk over here and I'm going to show y'all the house. So this house is original. It was restored, but it was restored in the 1960s by a man named W.L. Carleton. This house was originally built by a man named Richard Decatur Lee in the 1800s. Now that name Lee is probably pretty familiar to you, but Richard Lee was actually not related to the Robert E. Lee. They just had the same taste in politics and the same taste in housing. So when Richard Lee lived here, he oversaw the area of civil defense. And this became the headquarters for General Magruder's during his Peninsula campaign, the campaign we've been talking about during this time. The name Lee should be pretty familiar to you too, because we talked about Lee's Mill. And this Richard Lee actually owned Lee's Mill. The house, as you might have, it didn't take us very long to get from Lee's Mill to here. It's only about two miles from that scene. Also, another really cool thing about here is the Confederates used balloons to do reconnaissance. Actually, both sides used balloons, but one of the Confederates' earliest balloon usage actually happened here, maybe in one of these fields right around here. So think about that. There's not a road out here. We're near the water, and think about a big balloon right there. Probably sewed out by some women from silk, some women from Richmond doing the silk. Now the balloons in the 18th century, of course, nowadays we think of balloons going high up in the air, but at that point they're really being tied to the ground. They're just going up and they're tied to the ground, so it's not as dangerous. I mean, still dangerous, of course, but it's not as dangerous. So after the war, and of course I talk about the Civil War or what, when I was reading the paperwork for this about when it became a part of the Register of Historic Places, it actually did that in 1972. The paperwork actually called it not the Civil War, but the war between the states. But after that war, the war between the states, the Civil War, whichever side of the aisle you're on, a congressman from Massachusetts named Eli Thayer, he sponsored a plan to create a black agricultural colony here. And so the house was probably going to be the focus of that colony, but that never panned out. That never happened. But after the war, Richard Lee suffered a lot of financial loss because of his support of the Confederacy, and he was forced to sell Lee Hall. Of course, nowadays Lee Hall is owned by, I believe, the state of Virginia as a historical property. But Lee actually, after sold his property, he moved to Mulberry Island, which we were at earlier. That Mulberry Island is Fort Eustis. And Lee bought a house there and he lived there. And until pretty recently, that house was actually occupied by the Chief of Staff at Fort Eustis. And unfortunately, a lot of the historic homes on Fort Eustis have been torn down. But when you're around that area, there's actually a lot of historic sites, and that's one of them that was there. So I want to, do any of y'all have any questions about anything? No? Okay, so I'm going to give y'all a little bit of time here, walk around. We have about 30-35 minutes or so. If you need to use the bathroom, the house is open for touring. And if you just want to walk around, take pictures, or have some water, or take a break, and I'll meet y'all at the bus back at the parking lot in about 30 minutes. Thanks.